Last month, I was talking to a group of friends, and one of those friends had been using some online fitness classes that go with their stationary bike. And I don't think she has an actual Peloton bike, but she was using the Peloton classes. And so if you've heard of that, it's this whole series of online fitness classes you can do on a bike or on a mat, and a lot of people use it. And she has loved those classes. And so she was telling us, her friends, about this thing that she enjoyed so much. And at some point, while she was telling us about how great her experience had been, she stopped and began to apologize to us for talking too much about these online Peloton classes. And so after she apologized, we said, no, you don't need to apologize to us. We're your friends, and this is something you love, you enjoy, and you just want to share it with us. Like, that's normal. That's how humans are. We want to share the things that we love, the things that bring us joy, with other people. I know that I, in the past year, have inadvertently proselytized a whole bunch of people about the online meat delivery service that I use now, because it checks my ethical boxes and it also tastes really good. And I do that because it's something that I'm excited about, and having food that tastes really good for me is a source of joy. And so, again, that's part of our humanity. That's part of how God made us. When something brings us joy, when something makes us more than just happy, but fulfills us in a certain way, we have to share it. And so our question today is, are we sharing joy as part of our practice of observing Advent? So I know that this is a season of waiting and a season of preparing. This is a season of self-reflection. We have purposefully made our worship services a little bit quieter, a little bit more contemplative. We've started in kind of a place of lament sometimes, and then moved into maybe a little more of the light, a little more of the assurance. But even in the midst of all of that, even in the midst of the quietness of Advent, the quietness of waiting for a baby to be born, none of that is without joy. Joy is still a part of this season. And on the third Sunday of Advent, we especially recognize joy, and we have to recognize the source of where that joy comes from for us as Christians. That joy is rooted in the good news that God is bringing to us, this good news that we're waiting to arrive on Christmas, the good news of Jesus Christ, the good news we're preparing for. So what exactly is that good news? Well, we heard a little bit of it in our scripture readings today from Isaiah 61, and then Mary's song, the Magnificat, from Luke 1. And both of these passages give us a vision, give us an idea of the way that God coming to earth, the incarnation of God, is going to change things. These are both prophetic messages of the way that God is going to take our broken and sinful world and turn it on its head. And so I want you to hear those words from Isaiah again. Listen to what the prophet tells us God is coming to do. This good news is good news to the oppressed. It is binding up the brokenhearted. It is a proclamation of liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners. It is the Lord's favor. It is comfort for those who mourn. It is a garland instead of ashes. It's the oil of gladness instead of mourning. It's the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit. Isaiah tells us that the Lord loves justice that we yearn for, that the Lord hates robbery and wrongdoing, that the Lord makes an everlasting covenant, an unbreakable covenant, that all of the descendants of God's people will know among the nations. And we know that the Lord is bringing garments of salvation, robes of righteousness, and that this hope, this new thing that's being brought, that the prophet is talking about, that the prophet is telling us is on the way, will spring up like a seed that's planted. Righteousness and praise will spring up before all of the nations. So in the midst of the struggle of exile, in the midst of feeling like everything has fallen apart, in the midst of not knowing what comes next, there is hope and there is joy in that hope. Joy that's rooted in this new thing that God is doing, this turning upside down all of the things that are wrong, all of the brokenness, all of the sin, all of the despair, all of the heartache and pain and scarcity. The promise of the good news that is coming is a reversal of all of those things. And it's good news that Mary proclaims too, when she comes to know that she is bearing the incarnation of God in her own body. Here's the song that she sings to speak about that reality that she now knows. She says that the mercy of the Lord is for those who fear the Lord from generation to generation, that he has shown strength with his arm, that he has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their heart, that he has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly, that he has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty, that the Lord has helped the servant Israel in remembrance of the Lord's mercy, according to the promise that he made to the ancestors, to Abraham, and to Abraham's descendants forever. This good news is a good news that people have been waiting for a long time. It's good news that all of the things that we have faced historically and continue to face today, that all of those are going to be righted. And that's the root of the joy that we experience in this season. That's the root of the good news that we are hearing the prophets and Mary, who is herself a prophet, proclaim, and that we too proclaim in this season. It's the good news that we're waiting for, that we're preparing ourselves to live into. Now, how exactly does this thing that existed so long before Jesus relate to Jesus? How does the way that God is turning the world upside down exactly relate to Christmas? Because often we think when we talk about the good news of Jesus Christ, we're thinking about death and resurrection. For so many, especially American Christians, our understanding of good news is solely rooted in the idea of what happens on the cross and then 3 days later on Easter. The idea of the loss of death's sting, of the defeat of the powers of hell. But God coming to be among us, God coming to earth, not as a rich and powerful king, but as a baby born to the wrong kind of family, born to a poor family, to a family who is in that moment, who are in that moment migrants, who are in a way, at least temporarily, homeless, who become refugees shortly after the birth of that baby, who are part of an ethnic group that is not at the top of the food chain in the Roman Empire. When God chooses to come to this earth, into our problems as that baby, that in and of itself is good news. Because God's incarnation, even as the infant Christ, means that we're not abandoned, that God is keeping those promises. And it's an act of solidarity of being with our struggle, our humanity, our sin. It means that even in all of our brokenness, even in all of the things we mess up and get wrong, the ways that we are imperfect, that God is still with us. So now that we know what the source of our joy is, that we understand a little bit more about the good news in the season of Advent and exactly how that relates to us waiting for the birth of Christ, what are some practical things that we can do about living with joy and living with joy that is rooted in the good news of the coming of Christ? So first of all, I think we need to pay attention to where the good news in Luke is coming from. Who is singing that song? It's Mary, the mother of Jesus. And there are a lot of other sermons out there that go into a much better job than I'm going to do today about examining who Mary is and why exactly who she is so important. But I just want to say this about her. She's not who we would expect, right? She is someone whose family finds themselves in a bit of a scandalous position. I mean, Joseph tries to divorce her quietly, and an angel has to intervene and tell him to stick it out, that this is the Lord's doing, that he has nothing to fear. But Mary is someone who doesn't look like, who doesn't have the family situation of someone that would be respectable enough for most of us to really listen to the words that they're saying, to listen to the good news that they're proclaiming. And so I think if we want to really lean into practicing hope, and practicing hope through the good news of Jesus Christ and experiencing the joy of that, then we've got to have our ears open. We've got to learn to listen to people who are the unexpected voices, the unexpected prophets of our time. We also have to understand that we have a job. We have a job to do as Christians, as people who find the root of our joy in this good news of the coming of Christ. This good news is meant to be shared. Just like my friend was sharing about her online fitness classes, just like I talk too much about the steaks that I get delivered to my house. When something brings us joy, we need to share it. I think God made us that way, and the good news of God being in solidarity with us, coming to redeem this world, coming to be amongst us, that news is so good that we've got to be in touch with how good it is for us, so that we experience that joy, and then so that we proclaim it to others. And when we do that, when we purposefully, intentionally proclaim the joy, share the joy that we have with other people, share this good news of God, setting things right, then that is a practice of hope. That's us acting out of a living hope, a life lived through the lens of hope. And so if we want to have hopeful lives, we've got to practice having hope in our lives. One of the ways we do that is through proclaiming this joy, through proclaiming this good news. The other part of this proclamation that we are charged with is that we can be speaking hope into the world with our words. There is a long and rich history of people speaking the truth and proclaiming what God is doing in the midst of all of the troubles of the world. And there may be many of us who are called to that kind of work, to prophetic speech, to speaking truth to power and saying how things could be, to inviting people in to a place of imagination, of imagining what God is doing and living into the hope of that coming reality. But we also can make that hope, that good news, a reality through our actions. When we love and serve others, when we act in the midst of the kingdom of God, when we act like God has already turned things around and we're living in that reality now, those are intentional acts of hope. That is us putting our faith into action and practicing hope and sharing it with others when they are part of those actions. So friends, if you in the season of Advent or in any season want to live a life of hope, what you've got to know is where that root of that hope is. And then you've got to practice living out that hope, living with joy, sharing the joy that you have in the good news of Christ and what God is doing in this world through Jesus, sharing that with other people so that they can come to know that joy, so that they can come to know that living hope too.